September video for the 2017 Quiltmania Mystery Quilt. This month we're going to be making 3 different blocks, and we're introducing some new fabrics and some new techniques. So the fabric we're using this month I've laid out here. The ones from the bottom up to the shirting we've all used before, and the new two new ones that we're introducing are the Torrington cream stripe and also the Torrington blue lattice fabrics. So let's get to see what we're doing. Okay, so what I've got laid out here is the pattern for the first block that we're going to look at this month. It's using a few techniques. It's applique in all of the middle bit, and then we're going to do some foundation piecing on that dogtooth border. So I'll show you how to do that, and I've prepared it to the point where I'm ready to actually trim this down, so I'd like to go through what we've actually done up to date. So this is where I'm at up to date. So you'll see that I've actually done a bit of fussy cutting in this. I've fussy cut the lattice, and I've also fussy cut this main print, this from the main border print here. You may not use the same motifs that I've used, but you can see that it's quite effective because it does give you a secondary sort of circle coming through around here. How I've prepared this block is, if we just zoom back over to the pattern for a minute, I've marked the midpoints through here just so that we've got those references. What I've done here is for the middle part that covers this, I've actually appliqued a circle behind here in the yellow shirting. So I've marked the middle. As we've done previously, you'll fold your fabric, find the midpoints and give yourself the diagonal references, and you can see how beneficial that is when you come to line up these little points of the hearts. So this is the yellow shirting, and I've just cut, this is a 6-inch circle. So your local quilt shop may have something like that, otherwise you do have a template in your pattern sheet. I've just marked around that and added my seam allowance, and I've appliqued that onto the back of my work, and then I've trimmed away, once that's appliqued, I've trimmed away any excess fabric. So you can see that that's what I've done through there. Now, once you come to doing these appliques, these little heart appliques, there's one of 2 ways that you can do it. You can cut each individual heart and applique it on, and then position this and applique that on once you've completed all of the blue shirtings, and the same with the outside ones. Alternatively, you could cut a strip of fabric like I've done here, and you can applique these onto the strip and just top and tail them along the length of the strip, and then marking your template over that, then cutting out this shirting so that you're actually cutting this shape out then and appliquing it on. So really it's a personal preference. There is no right or wrong here. It's just as long as you end up with the finished thing. So that's what we want as a finished applique for those hearts. You'll see that they just touch each other, and that you are not seeing the edge of that circle because it's hidden under here where all of these little hearts meet. Now, in terms of these little circles here, I've cut them from this circle fabric, and this is just a 1-inch circle. Again, you've got a template, but you've got a template. However, if you are lucky enough to be able to find some circles, this is just your 1-inch one, mark around the edge of the circle, and I've just needle turned applique from there. You could use the perfect circles and do a tacking basting stitch around it and pull it up if you prefer to do it that way. So again, personal preference as to which way you'd prefer. And then these are all appliqued on. So applique, I laid it all out and appliqued them down so that we end up with it's sitting on this particular square here. I've cut as a 15-inch square just to give myself enough room to now trim that back. So now I've completed this centre part. I'll actually cut out a template. So you'll end up with a template, and I've just cut this out of Vilene. You can cut it out of Templastic if you prefer. One thing I do need to urge with you is not to photocopy your pattern sheet. I know that sometimes in the magazine you don't get the complete pattern. It's better to trace it very accurately than to photocopy it, because the photocopier can distort. And the last thing you want to do is put a lot of work in and then find that it doesn't fit, especially when you're doing things like these little dog teeth around the outside, because you want them to be able to fit the circle. So I've cut this template. What I'll do is I'll position this, centering it, and I'll pop my template over the top, and then I will mark around the edges of that and cut that back so that it's cut back to a circle. So this is not an image of the complete block, as you can see the edges have cut off it, but it's just to give you an idea that this is your little dog teeth ring around the outside. And on your pattern sheet, which will look different to mine because yours will be formatted for the magazine, this template here is actually the foundation for this outside dogtooth ring. So I'm going to show you how to prepare the foundations. What you've got over here is your templates, and you'll make templates out of Templastic. Now I've given you a hand piecing template, a traditional machine piecing template, and this outer template is the template that you use for foundation piecing. So whenever you're foundation piecing, you never have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. You always have a larger one. So if you prefer to hand piece this, you'll just trace on the inside, line, add your seam allowance, and then hand piece from there. For those of you preferring to learn how to foundation piece, then you'll use these outside lines. Now, I've cut the templates out of Templastic, and I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see that being clear. And then I've cut my templates from that. Now you'll see that what I've done is I've just measured here and I've cut a strip. I haven't bothered to curve anything. We'll actually curve that as we go. So don't waste your time, just cut a strip, and then you can just top and tail the template along the strip. So what I've got here is I've cut out this foundation, and I've given myself about 1 inch all the way around. Now you may prefer to trace this, given that it's part of a magazine, and I'm not sure what will be on the back of your work. But as I stressed earlier, please don't photocopy it because you'll find it may distort. So if you're tracing it, just make sure you're really accurate. What I've done then is I've cut 2 pieces of freezer paper, and I've just cut them so that they're big enough for that to sit over the top. So with enough room for some staples to staple that on. So I've got the shiny side of the freezer paper facing up on both pieces. You've got a dull and a shiny side. So shiny side up, and I'm just going to staple that on. So keeping your staples away from where you're going to, from these lines here, because you're going to actually sew through this amount of foundation. So you can see I'm just sliding my stapler. I'm not pulling it in and out because we want it to sit as flat as possible. And if we pull it in and out, then it's likely to buckle. So that's now sitting. Just check that it's nice and flat on the back, and we're now ready to go. So I'm going to remove the thread from my sewing machine, the top thread and also the bottom thread, so that when you do this you will have no thread whatsoever. So I'm going to actually pierce through my pattern onto the freezer paper. So to do that, I'm going to drop my stitch length down. Now my bonita comes on at about 2.2. I'm just going to drop that down a little bit so that the stitch length is a bit shorter. So I've got it on about 2. So I've dropped it down a couple of points. I prefer to have my needle down so that if I stop, my work won't move on me. I'm then going to, this is an old needle that I've got in my sewing machine, so it's not a brand new needle. I'm then going to just position that and sew along all the lines on the pattern. So you can see how I'm just following that line. It's a little bit like kindergarten sewing. but you need to be accurate when you do this because this is the foundation, and if this is not accurate, then your work won't be accurate. So I've sewn around all of these lines, including the outside line, to give myself a seam allowance, and I'm going to turn it over and just check, and very clear from the back whether or not you've missed a line. So you really need to make sure that once you think you're finished, just make sure that you don't have any lines missing, because once you take the pattern off, you won't ever get back on in the same time. So when you're piercing, you just need to make pay particular attention to the points, because the last thing you want to do is to lose your points. Once I've done that, I'm just going to remove the staples. Now, what you can do is you can just pop a couple of staples in the middle there, just to hold the 3 layers together, and then you can actually cut the staples off, and then we will use the staple extractor to move those staples. So when you trim it back, you're going to trim on the outside line. Don't trim any of the design off. And I've found that in the past I have taught people who, for some reason, cut their seam allowance off. So the last thing you want to do is cut your seam allowance off. So we're just going to trim that back so that we end up with that shape foundation. So we've got our foundation here, and I'm going to start to sew in the middle of this foundation. So this is a symmetrical foundation. It doesn't have to be started at one end or the other. You can actually start at the end and just piecemeal add, but if you start at the middle, once you've got the 2 centre ones on, you can then add to both sides. So with this technique, you're going to be sewing, ironing, and then trimming back. So I've laid out my my work area here. My iron is on cotton, and it doesn't have any steam, so you can't use steam with this technique. I normally don't use steam when I'm doing patchwork, but certainly with this, you certainly don't want steam to shrink the paper or make it not stick to the fabric. So with the wrong side of my fabric, I'm going to place that down on the ironing mat, and I'm going to lay roughly in the centre. I'm going to lay this shiny side of this foundation down, and I'm going to iron it in place. So that's now my paper is ironed on, or my fabric is ironed onto the paper, like so. Now going to the cutting mat, I'm going to fold along the first row of perforations, which is the seam allowance for that particular piece. So if we've look at it on this one here, which is a bit clearer, we've ironed it onto the centre here, and we're going to fold along this line here, which is our next seam, to add the next piece along. We're going to fold our our paper off our fabric, not the other way around. If you hold it up in the air, you're likely to rip the whole thing off. So keeping it flat, gently ease it back until you find the perforations, and in particular you want to pay attention to the points. So once you've got your points right, you're going to then just iron that back, and we're going to lay the 1/4 inch seam allowance of our ruler on that fold of the paper and trim that back. And this is the step that is an important step that we don't want to miss, but it's a step that a lot of people, if they're going to miss a step, will miss that. I've allowed you extra in your template, but if you waste all that sitting in here, in the seam allowance on this side, chances are you won't cover the paper on the other side and you'll have no seam allowance. So we've trimmed that back. We're now going to go back over to the machine, and I'm going to position this next piece of fabric as it's going to sit, so that I make sure that I correctly orientate it. It's easy to accidentally put it upside down, and then I'm going to turn that over so that we've got right sides together, and fold the paper back. So you'll see here what I've done. Now I'm just going to move it down. We've got a wider piece of fabric here, and we want more down towards the wider, the wedgy side of the template rather than at the point, because the point will be covered. So we want to allow for any curves that may curve outwards. So I've lined that up, I've centred it, I've pushed it down so that it's sitting where I want it. I'm then going to, I put my machine back together with the cotton and the bobbin, I've got my stitch length back to normal, and then I'm going to position that so that my sewing machine needle is going to glide along the fold. So I'm not actually going to sew through any paper, I'm sewing right next to it. So I'm then just going to sew right along the edge of the fold. Now, I've given you, we've done 2 sets of these, so what you can do is you can reuse these. So once you've covered this whole piece of foundation of freezer paper, you can peel it off the back and you can reuse it. I've given you a second one here so that what we can do is we can chain piece if we want to. So just to save time, I'm just going to do a sample for you so that you know what I'm doing, and then I'll go ahead and chain piece. I've come back to the ironing board and I've laid my piece of fabric, my work with the fabric side down. I'm then going to open that fold there, and I'm going to just press that on to secure the fold, and then turn it over, and gently I'm going to open that up and iron that on. So you want to be really careful doing this for 2 reasons. One, you don't want to stick your iron to the waxy side of the paper, and secondly, you don't want to distort it and pull it off the paper. So we've got that position where we want it. If you tug at it, you'll find it can easily fall off. So then we turn it round and I just give it a press from the back so that it's nice and secure. And then going back to the ironing board, we're going to do the other side of the red one. So we've got our perforations here, and I'm not sure whether you can see them, but the same as we had here. We're going to fold on those perforations and ease that back and find our point, and then fold that down. So you'll be able to see I've got a row of perforations coming in here, another row coming in here, and they must meet at this seam line that we've just done. So once you're happy with that, you'll then trim that as we did previously, 1/4 inch seam allowance on the fold, and trim that excess off. Go back to our iron. I'm just going to give that an iron because it's a bit squunchy. And as we did previously, we're going to line that up as it's going to sit, turn it over so that you've got the right sides together, fold our fold back, make sure that we've got a little bit at the top, but we've got the majority of the wedge part towards the bottom. So again, as I said earlier, if you've got a curve coming out, then you want to make sure that you've got more on this triangle that you're putting on, more at the wider edge at the bottom towards that. I've nearly finished completing this arc, so I'm just going to show you the last few things just to reinforce where we were at before. So I'm just pressing those seam allowances down, turning it over, and then at this end, this is the last one, so I'm just going to gently ease that back and turn it over. Just iron it. I hope the iron's not in the way. And then gently iron this one back. And then again, folding on the perforated line. And once you've used this once, it actually is already folded for you, so it folds quite easily along the perforations. We're trimming that back along the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've got the 1/4 inch line on the fold, trim that back, and then over to the sewing machine, and we're going to position that and flip it over, fold it back, making sure that there's more towards the wedge end than the point. Put it under the sewing machine and just sew along the fold. Get to the other end. And we've now just got the last one on it. So again, we're going to press the seam line down, seam allowance down, gently fold that back, turn it over, give it a press so that you're smoothing out the paper and it's not all ruffled over. Folding along the perforations and then trimming it back to 1/4 inch and adding the last piece. So we've now finished this foundation. We've covered this foundation, and you can see it's very raggedy looking at the moment. I'm going to turn it over and trim back along the edge of the paper. So whatever you do, don't trim any paper off, because you want to keep your seam allowance intact. So just, you can trim any straight edges from using the rotary cutter. I'll just trim those back, and then just with the scissors, just trimming around the very edge of the paper. So this one now I've trimmed back, so we've trimmed along the edge of the paper, along those perforations, making sure that we've kept the seam allowance intact. So it looks a lot better once it's trimmed back. So now we've trimmed it back, we're going to peel the paper off from where we've started to sew. So the seam allowances, as we've sewn, have pressed in the direction that we're sewing, so we want to make sure that we keep our seam allowances pointed in that direction. So just popping your thumb in, there, loosening the paper, and then gently easing it back one way and then easing it back the other way. Just keep those seam allowances as we've pressed them. Okay. So that's a quarter, and as I said earlier, we can now reuse this piece of paper, and you know, if you were doing a big project, you can reuse that 6 to 8 times usually. So we're now going to join these together so that we join them into a half, and then we'll join the other two together, and then we'll join them into a whole. So this is the completed ring now. So it's, ready to go onto the circle. I'll just turn it over because I often get asked, how do you actually press the seam allowances? So just, if we can perhaps zoom in on this little bit here, you'll see that this is the seam allowance that I've sewn, and I've just clipped in here because I like to actually see my points at the top and the bottom, so that when I go back to sew them, I don't actually cut them off. So I've just clipped in and pressed one way and one the other way, which is how it wants to sit anyway, and you can see that in the 4 spots where I've joined the circles, the quarter circles together to complete the circle. The very last part we've got to do is to do the outside setting square that will sit around the outside, such as this. So it's cut in 4 sections, so you'll cut 4 using the template, and we're going to join the seams here so that we complete, and here, so that we end up with 2 halves, and then we'll join them together to obtain a circle, a square with a circle cut out of the centre of it. So I'll just do those, and then we'll be ready to assemble. So I've now sewn these together, so we've got the square with the big hole in the middle, and this, we'll actually assemble it so that this is the last part that goes on, and as we've done as we do with any circle, we find our quarters, which we've got. We'll then fold from here to here to find the midpoint here, and we can break that down as much as possible so that we find a point for every point here, so that that will sit inside there and it will be evenly distributed. So you've got your points already here for you. So you will just divide this down so that you end up with a point for every point to match. So I'll go away and sew that, and then we'll come back and have a look at the completed block. Here is the block now trimmed down, ready to be assembled. Just when you're trimming it down, be very careful that you do centre everything so that you have the hearts evenly spaced around the centre, and so that when you cut your seam, sew your seam, you're not going to cut any of the heart off. So just be very careful laying it out and check it to make sure that you've got it perfectly centred. The dogtooth border is now attached to the circle, and as you can see, I've evenly spaced that by dividing up the circle so that I've got a point for each of the points on the actual dogtooth. So if you pin lots and lots of pins, and then it will sit nice and flat and there'll be no pleats or buckles in it. The block is now completed, and as you'll see here, you need to make sure that you put these stripes on a 45-degree angle. So because of the way the block is orientated within the quilt, you can't have the stripes running north-south. They need to be on a 45-degree angle. So exactly the same technique. We've got the seam lines here. We found our midpoint, and then we found the quarter point, so that there was a point for every second one of the dog teeth vertically in the finished quilt. All the blocks this month are exact sizes, so there's no cutting down in any of these blocks because the outer templates for all of them are an exact measurement. And they should all measure 15 inches finished or 15.5 inches with seam allowance. One of the other blocks we're doing this month is the Mariner's Compass, and you'll see I've pinned up on the board here my pattern for this. Your pattern will look different because of the magazine, but you'll see here that we've got 2 foundation piece patterns, and also we've got the templates on this side. And as I spoke about earlier, we've got an inner line which is a hand piecing line, the middle line which is a traditional machine piecing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and the outside line is the line that you cut your templates for your fabric from for foundation piecing. So that has the added seam allowance. So this is what we're aiming for with the Mariner's Compass, and you'll see that there are 8 of these little units in here, and those are actually made up of 2 different foundations. This is one, and as you'll see, that sits in here, and then the other one is this little section here. This piece here is an accurate template, so it's cut with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it is not foundation piece, so it's not part of the foundation. You'll complete these foundations, you'll complete this unit, and then you'll add this unit to the side, and then this unit will be added on after that. So you'll add that to the same side of each of these completed foundation units. Here is one of these units completed, and what I wanted to show you now is how we add this piece on here, this larger kite, which is fussy cut, and how you actually add that on when you're foundation piecing. So you'll see here, this is my template that I've made for cutting out this lattice fabric here. So I've actually laid the template on top of that and marked on the template. You probably can't see that very clearly, but I've marked the little flowers here onto my template so that each time I lay it on a new piece of fabric, I can cut it out exactly the same. So once we've completed that and cut that out, I'm now at the stage where I've got my foundation to that stage. So these little units are put on, and they can be put on in any order really. I always have started with this yellow one or gold one, and I've added the 2 blue ones to the sides of those, and we're now ready to add the red one. Now, because I've cut out this particular fabric with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, I've added extra seam allowance. What I want to do now is to trim that extra 1/8 of an inch off from the first edge. This will then bring the template back to the centre. If I were to leave that on and allow that to have a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which I've deliberately done to allow for coverage on the other side of the paper once it's sewn on and ironed back on, if I leave that, what will happen is it will actually shift the centre of this across another 3/8 of an inch. So I want to eliminate that from happening. So looking at the side I'm going to stitch on, which is this left-hand side here, I'm just going to place the 1/8 of an inch seam line of my ruler along that edge and trim that excess fabric off. It is now ready for me to stitch on, and I shouldn't have any difficulty with that being centred. So you can see here I've now completed this, and I've trimmed it back, and it's sitting, the lattice is sitting exactly how I wanted it in the middle. So these are the two units that I was talking about earlier. I will now join these units together and we'll make 4 of those, and then this other piece will sit alongside of that. Now the only thing that you need to be aware of with this is that once we join this on, we're going to have another one of these blue units coming in at this angle, and that's creating a Y seam at this point here. So there are 3 seams going to be coming together. So if we just look at this particular one, we've got 1, 2, 3 seams coming together. So the only thing you need to be aware of here is that you can't stitch this seam all the way through to the raw edge. You need to stop at the 1/4 inch mark, as in the seam line, as if you were hand piecing it. So you can do it on the sewing machine without any problems, but it's as if you're hand piecing it. So if I just look at the back of what I've done here, and I'm not sure whether you can see it very clearly, but I've actually drawn that 1/4 inch mark with my ruler. I've just ruled along there so that I know that I have to stop at that particular point and backstitch or secure my seam. So this is one of the completed units, and as you'll see here, I haven't sewn to the raw edge. I've stopped a 1/4 inch in, and that enables me then to open that up and have another seam coming through here, which will also stop at the 1/4 inch. So that's a 1/4 of that unit. As you'll see over here, this is now ready to go. If you want to, you can fussy cut these little bits. I haven't in this particular block, but I was just having a play when I was making up the one for the sample, just so that you can see the effect of the circles if you made them in exactly the same spot. You'll see when that comes through there, you'll have it sitting in the peak. So as we did with the other block from this month, we will then make that outside square with the hole in the middle, divide that up, and we'll insert this completed circle inside that hole to complete the block. Now this is the final block for this month. It actually is not quite completed, but it's at the point where I can show you what I've done. It's a Caesar's crown block. I've hand pieced this block. It's got a lot of Y seams where you've got 3 seams coming together. So these sort of blocks are much easier done by hand. However, having said that, as long as you mark that starting and stopping point a 1/4 inch in from the raw edge, then you could do this by the machine. It has got a gentle curve here as well, so you just have a little bit more control by hand. So this is pieced in 2 circles or rings, so you've got a ring here and another ring here, which includes these diamonds. Then these units here are made as a corner unit, so there's just a seam line through there, and once you've inserted the centre into the first or the middle ring, you can then do this seam through here, which completes that block as it is now. I have fussy cut these stripes so that they meet nicely and have a nice mitered effect in the corner. So to do that, just simply draw on your template so that each time you turn it around, each time you place it down, you line up those lines. So you've got a mirror image template here, so by marking the lines on one side, you'll flip it over and follow the same lines on the other. So this centre piece, I've just done a little bit of a mock-up here. This is a curved seam, so as we've done previously with curved seams, we will fold these bits, find the midpoint, do the same on this piece, fold it, find the midpoint, and then I like to have the concave curve uppermost, so I would then pin so that these points meet, pin at the edge, and then you'll find that these, you can just manoeuvre these around so that they all line up. And then that's just again the hand piecing seam, which will make it a lot easier for you to have that control. It is quite a curve that you could do on the machine if you preferred. So just as we talked about just now, finding your midpoint here and then easing in between. The same thing will be happening on the other side of this blue. You'll find this point here you'll have a point here for each of the other diamonds. You can find also this midpoint here just by refolding from here to mark that point there. Now this particular block is finished off with an applique triangle at each corner, which then turns it back into a square sitting on point. So you'll see here I've got a pattern sheet that will be provided in the magazine. I've cut my shirting fabric larger than the actual template, so you'll see I've cut it to this size here. I've marked on the back of that a diagonal line from corner to corner. So I'm not sure whether you can see that, but I've actually just marked from corner to corner to give this line here, which will be your final cutting line. I've placed my fabric over the top of my pattern sheet and positioned my motifs so that they're positioned exactly equidistant from your middle, so that once you've completed the motif, the appliquing of the motifs down, you can then cut diagonally through the line, and using your template you can just lay that on and reshape that to the correct size. That will then be appliqued to the edges, each edge of the pieced work to complete the block. So this is the Mariner's Compass block. As you can see, I've done two just for fun, really. The one here on the left, I've fussy cut these little circles in just to see what effect it was and positioned it so it had a little brown point. And the one on the right-hand side, I've just cut that scrappy and haven't really aligned anything. So we'll just zoom into both of them just for effect, and you can decide whether or not you want to fussy cut or whether you just want to randomly cut and get the effect that way. As you can see with both of them, I have fussy cut this lattice print. This is a completed Caesar's crown block, and you'll see that I've now sewn on these little motifs, and I showed you earlier that there's a little pattern sheet just for placement of these so that you could place them and then cut them back to the correct size. So using the template, I just drew around the template and then hand pieced that to the edge of the original Caesar's crown block. Just another note, just that this also, the stripe through here, if you choose to use a stripe through here, is also sitting on a 45-degree angle, so that when that is orientated correctly within the quilt, it will sit vertically. Again, this is an exact size, 15 inches finished and 15.5 inches with seam allowances.